Hello Cloud Gurus, and in this section I'm going to introduce the AWS DynamoDB console. This lesson will be very technically basic, and the intended audience is those students who have not had any DynamoDB experience before. If you do have DynamoDB experience, then feel free to continue watching or to skip past this lesson. Let's get started. So in this lesson, I want to spend some time inside the DynamoDB console. And this is especially important to those students who haven't had any experience with DynamoDB, and even more critical for students with no previous database experience. The lesson will serve two main purposes. First, it will be a guide around the DynamoDB console from a UI perspective, and second, it will reinforce the ideas introduced in the DynamoDB introduction lesson and take you through the structures of tables and items. The next few lessons will reinforce this and will show you how we can use DynamoDB operations to work with items and tables from the console as well as from the CLI. I'd strongly encourage you to follow along with the steps on your own machine if you've never touched DynamoDB before, as I feel it will give you good practical exposure. So let's dive in. DynamoDB is accessed from the database grouping from the main AWS console. Let's click and have an initial look. So we scroll down and we look for DynamoDB, and it's generally on the left-hand side inside the database grouping. Now, as with all AWS services, if you haven't used it before, you will see a familiar Getting Started style screen. It will provide some useful hints around creating tables, as well as adding and querying items, as well as monitoring and managing tables. You can have a look around if you like, but we will be covering all of these elements in detail within the structure of the course. So the first thing I'm going to mention, as with all of the lessons, is make sure that you've selected a suitable region on the top right of your screen. I keep reiterating this throughout the course. My suggestion is that you pick one of the AWS regions and use that as your standard region for every lesson, demo, and exercise within this course. And I'll be using North Virginia just to keep it simple. Now, if you're already at the Getting Started screen, you can click on Create Table, which should be in the center of your window. If you have already created services before, you may not see the Getting Started screen, and the Create Table button may be towards the top left. Either way, it's blue and fairly unmissable. So go ahead and click it now if you're following along with this video. Now, the example I'm going to use for this demo is the Course Theory Case Study, Weather Stations Incorporated. Now, as I've mentioned, the business have millions of weather stations, and every second, each one of these devices sends an update to DynamoDB containing at least two attributes, the weather station ID and the date and time. Other attributes are included, assuming all of the weather station systems are accessible, but the only mandatory values are the hardware ID of the weather station and a current date and timestamp. So the Create Table screen is asking us initially for two values, a table name and a partition key. You'll recall from the introduction lesson that the table name is unique within the region, so keep that in mind. Now I'm going to use weather station _ data as my table name. Now if you click the little I symbol next to table name for information, you'll see the minimum and maximum length of table name together with the allowed characters. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to call my table name weather station _ data. So I'm going to go ahead and type that now. For the primary key, I'm going to select station ID, and I'm going to select string for its data type. So let me go ahead and type station ID first. Now if we click on the drop down, you'll see the possible data types for the partition key. And pay special attention that you only see the scalar data types, string, binary, and number. And this is because those are the only ones which are allowed to be used for table partition keys. You can't use any of the map or list or set or the other complex data types for the partition key or the sort key. You have to use scalar values. So the only ones available, string, binary, and number. Now let's pause quickly and think, will this be enough? We know that partition key has a few requirements. Firstly, it has to have a value. It's the only mandatory value on an item. and secondly, it has to be unique. We know that we have thousands of weather stations, and for the sake of argument, we can safely assume that each weather station has its own unique ID. But we also know that this table will contain one item per second for each of those stations. And that means from second 2 onwards, just using the single partition key will mean we have duplicate items in our table. And what I mean by that is the first time a weather station writes to this table, it will use station ID as the partition key. And it will write other data along with that station ID, such as temperature, rainfall, UV levels, and others. Now the problem is that first write will be fine. The second time it attempts to write an item of data to this table, the only options will be either to overwrite the existing item or to fail the write, because we know that a partition key needs to be unique. So it's clear that this key structure will not work for this case study. And we're going to resolve this by using a sort key. As you've learned in the introduction lesson, a sort key serves a few functions. It allows selections of items to be retrieved using its value or a range of its values, and it provides a way to sort items by its values. It also, and this is a critical one in this case, allows multiple items to be added for a single partition key value. So for a given weather station, we can add an almost infinite number of items as long as the sort key value is different. So this means that the unique item key will now be a composite of the partition key and the sort key. So let's go ahead and check the add sort key box. You'll notice that the UI changes to indicate that the two keys are now joined, or to put it another way, composite in nature. So let's add date and time as the sort key, and we're going to leave it as a string. Now we could click create immediately, and the table will be created with some of the default presets, but I want to spend a minute or two talking about them. So let's uncheck the use default settings box. Now it's here that we can add a secondary index, and you may not know what that is yet, and we'll talk about it in much more detail in later lessons of this course. For now, it's enough to know two things. Firstly, that this is actually a local secondary index, and these need to be created at the time of table creation. Now you can't make one of these at any point after this without recreating the table. And for a table with millions or 100 millions of rows, this could be a lengthy operation. Now at a high level, a local secondary index allows you to create an alternative view of the table. A view which has the same partition key, i.e. station ID, but allows us to pick an alternative sort key. And I'll explain why this is important later. For now, just try and commit those two takeaways to memory. Firstly, you can only make local secondary indexes now, and they allow an alternative sort key to be used. You will also see below this the provisioned capacity settings for read and for write. And note they ask for capacity units. Now I don't need to talk about these yet, as we have a whole lesson dedicated to table performance or table capacity. Now there are three key takeaways. Firstly, that performance or capacity are controlled at a table level. They can be added at any time and they can be adjusted. At a basic level, you can view these adjustments as something available at any time and coming without penalty. But as I'll demonstrate in later lessons, this is not strictly true, and any changes to read capacity or write capacity units need to be made with care and consideration. So I'm going to tick the use default settings box again, just so that we don't have to set any of those manually, and I'm going to click on create to create the table. Now if you're following this demo and doing it within your own environment, you may notice that you have a delay while the table is created, and that's indicated by the swirly progress symbol here. Now this can vary from fairly instant to taking 10 to 20 seconds. I'm going to pause the video and wait for this to complete. Now this table is created now, as you can see by the swirly progress symbols disappeared and been replaced by just a tick box here. Now let's step through the console elements quickly, and for those students who are familiar with this, please bear with me. You can either speed up the playback or skip ahead. Firstly, you can click on Dashboard and see an overview of your alarms and capacity configuration for the entire region, as well as any service health issues. In our case, it's simple. We don't have any service health issues, and we can see this here. And we know, since we only have one table and we ticked the Use Default Settings, that we have 5 read capacity units and 5 write capacity units allocated. And these are the defaults for all new table creations if you tick the Use Defaults box. Like many AWS services, you can pre-purchase reserved capacity, and this is done from the Reserved Capacity screen. As with other services, the terms are 1 and 3 years, and you can purchase read and write capacity separately for a heavily discounted price over using it in an ad hoc manner. For now, let's go back to the tables view, and you can see the table that I, or we, if you're following along, created moments ago. So this is the table, the weather station underscore data, and we can see that the status is listed as active, the partition key is station ID, and it's a string, and the sort key is date and time, and that's a string. We don't have any indexes, and we have a total capacity of 5 RCU, read capacity, and 5 WCU, write capacity. Now if we click on the table name, we're taken to the detailed information for this table. And this is the overview for the table. Now on this view, we can see detailed descriptions for the table. So the table name, the partition key, the sort key, the table status. We can also see additional information such as the created date, the last time capacity was decreased and increased, the storage size and item count, and note that both of these are not real time. They're calculated, as it suggests at the bottom, roughly once every 6 hours. We also see the region that the table's in, and we can also see the Amazon resource name for the table, which is useful if you're working in the API or the command line. Now I want to run quickly through the tabs, but I'm not going to labour on any of them. Access control is where we can set some fine-grained access control on our tables, and you will learn more about this in the permissions lesson later in the course. The Triggers tab gives us the option of event-driven actions based on updates to your tables and items, and I'm going to spend a significant amount of time later in the course giving you a number of demo and follow-along examples which illustrate how powerful triggers are. The Indexes tab is where you can create global secondary indexes. Now remember how I showed you earlier that you can create local secondary indexes only at table creation time, and they allow you to have an alternative view using the same partition key and an alternative sort key. Well, in this location, you can create global secondary indexes, and global secondary indexes allow an alternative partition and an alternative sort key. And once again, I'll be detailing this much more in a later lesson of this course. I just want to highlight where it's configured from a GUI perspective. Now, capacity is the one that I'm not a fan of the name of. Capacity is where you define the performance criteria on a table. You can adjust the read capacity units, defaulting at 5, and adjust the write capacity units, which is also defaulting to 5 because we selected the use defaults. Now on this screen, we can also see an estimated cost for this table. Now, before you get concerned, you're not going to be billed for this table. AWS include a generous allocation of 25 read capacity units and 25 write capacity units as part of the free tier for DynamoDB. Now, that means that you get 25 RCU and 25 WCU that you can use every hour of the month for every month for the first 12 months of any new account creation. While it says $2.91 a month, which would be the real cost, you're not charged as long as you don't go above 25 read and 25 write. Now, one thing to understand is that you're provided with 25 read capacity and 25 write capacity units for every hour of the month. Now, what this means is that you could have 25 of both for the entire month, or you could have 50 of both for half of the month. The allocation is on a per month basis. So you basically times 25 by the number of hours in a day, by the number of days in a month, and you end up with a value. And as long as you don't go over that value in the month, then you're not billed. So in some parts of the course, I'm going to be asking you to set these values to levels such as 500 or even higher. Don't be concerned, unless I tell you otherwise, you're not going to be billed for any course usage. Now, the Alarms tab allows the creation of alarms based on table performance. If we click on Create Alarm, if we click SNS topic, we can see the available SNS topics to use. We can set criteria here, such as the number of consumed read, the number of consumed write, throttled read, throttled write, and so on. There's many different metrics that we can actually use here. And then we can set for a given metric if it's over or equal, or if it's just more than, or if it's less than or equal to a certain value. And then we can say if that's true for a certain number of periods in a certain time frame, then alarm. And that alarm will send to an SNS topic, and then on that SNS topic we could have, for example, email notifications, or we could have a Lambda function running. And I'll detail more around Lambda style invocations later in this course. Now, the two alarms that are created already are created as long as we tick that use default settings box. And basically they're set so that if our consumed read or write capacity units are more than 4 for 5 minutes, so that's more than 80% of the default allocation, then send an SNS notification to this SNS topic. The Metrics tab shows some high-level monitoring for your table. Now, I'll go through this in more detail in the monitoring and alerting lesson, but for now, just be aware that it exists here. You can see table-specific metrics here, or you could also click on View CloudWatch Metrics, where you can go to a more detailed view and see results for longer time frames or results that cross table boundaries. Basically, the view that you get on the DynamoDB console is a cut down view just for this table, and you can click on the individual graphs and see for longer periods. You can alter the periods it's reporting for, you can alter the time frame, you can look at how the results are aggregated, minimum, maximum, sum, or average. But if you click on that view in CloudWatch, so view all CloudWatch metrics, you can go to the CloudWatch console and you can do a lot more advanced monitoring and alarm creation in that product. So just know that this feature is here, and you can also go into CloudWatch and see the same details. Now, if we click on the Items tab, the Items tab is where you can create and view items within the console. And we're going to spend some time working with this in the next lesson, along with similar operations from the command line. But I just want you to be aware that this is where you create items in your database or in your table from the GUI. Well, thanks for watching this brief console overview, Cloud Gurus. I know for some of you it may be really basic, but thanks for sticking with me. I need to ensure that all of the students taking this course have a foundational level of knowledge before I introduce some of the more advanced concepts. If you do have any questions about subjects covered in this lesson, or any others, feel free to reach out directly or via the Cloud Guru forums. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and feel free to complete this lesson and move on to the next.